There's a story that relates to the theme of today's gospel. It concerns humility and loving action. You see, a monk was dispatched from one monastery to another to be its new abbot. When the unknown abbot quietly arrived at his new assignment, unannounced, for no one knew what he looked like, the holy monks there sized him up. And they saw what they thought was a humble person with an unimpressive demeanor. So they did exactly what you think. They immediately sent him to work in their kitchen at the most menial of tasks. Uncomplaining, their new abbot, whom they didn't know was their new abbot, spent long hours scouring pots, washing floors, and shelling beans. Finally, the bishop of the diocese arrived at the monastery. When he could not find the long overdue abbot, he went on a search. Of course, he found him in the kitchen preparing that night's supper. When the bishop officially presented him to the monks in the chapel, well, they received a lesson in humility that would last them for a lifetime. The readings for this Sunday are very critical of religious leaders who are not faithful in their exercise of leadership. Jesus, too, condemns irresponsible religious leaders. Today's gospel again highlights a controversy between Jesus and the religious authorities of his time. Over the past few weeks, we've had controversies over things like to pay taxes or not, and what is the heart of the law. In today's passage, Jesus is pointing to the right order of relationships both within the community and toward God. Jesus criticizes those who pursue fancy titles like rabbi or father or master. A little bit of the history of the culture of the world in which Jesus lived, I think, can help us to better understand what Jesus is really saying. In discouraging grasping after titles, Jesus mentions rabbi. We could replace the word rabbi in his time with the word maybe director, father with moral guide, and teacher with guru. You see, the word rabbi meant my Lord. It's kind of like excellency in the church today. It's simply a title of honor in the first century in which Jesus lived. Although in verse 8 of today's gospel, rabbi seems to mean teacher as well. The modern meaning and role of the rabbi, in case you didn't know, didn't emerge and develop until the 3rd century AD. And only in contemporary America did rabbis come to be considered clergy. In the 1st century, the term father was applied to elders and certain respected deceased people, like our father Abraham, that sort of a thing. But in Matthew's gospel, father is a title reserved only for God. Jesus taught his followers to address God as Father, Abba. Now, this controversy involves more than just social prestige and honor. It reveals how people view themselves in relation to others. But you see, ultimately, what really matters is how we understand ourselves in relation to God, who alone is teacher, father, and master. You see, Jesus accuses the scribes and Pharisees of interpreting the law for others to follow, but failing to follow it themselves. They flaunt their office in public in order to enhance their own reputations. Jesus insists that his disciples, who shortly will be religious leaders in their own right, are to commit themselves unreservedly to the ministry and not to seek the acclaim of others. The point, quite simply, is that Jesus' disciples ought not to engage in an all-consuming search for honor by selecting titles like Father that they may not deserve. Now, I'm sure you've all been talked to by some Protestant who complains about the fact that we call male ordained ministers, that's priests, Father. Now, we have to ask ourselves a question. Did Jesus mean that you're not even allowed to refer to your dad as your father? I doubt it. Of course not. Jesus didn't mean that at all. If Christians took that verse literally, we would all have to refer to our male parent as, well, our male parent. So is Jesus speaking strictly in spiritual terms? Apparently, St. Paul didn't think so. In the Corinthian correspondence, he often reminds the Corinthians that he is their father spiritually. In the letter to Philemon, he tells Philemon that Onesimus, the slave, has become his son. He's his father while he's in captivity. And then there's the Romans correspondence in which Paul refers to Abraham as the father of us all. The New Testament has many references to fathers. Just read the genealogy contained in the Gospel according to St. Matthew, which, by the way, all of us priests and deacons dread. So it has all those genealogies with all those names in it, and we have to do it every year on December 17th and at the Christmas Vigil Mass. That's why you always hope, if you're a priest, you have a deacon on at that Mass. It's clear that St. Paul knew exactly what Jesus meant, not to attribute the fatherhood of God to anyone else. So the next time you see a priest, why not say to him, "Thanks, Father, for guiding your spiritual children." As a closing thought, on the bottom of my ordination chalice, there are words in Latin that go, "Imitare quod agimus," which means literally, imitate what you handle. Or we might say, imitate what you do. Or remember what this chalice is meant for and to become like it. You see, our faith has to be expressed in active love, not in empty words. How humble is our love.